The invitation came on a quiet afternoon when the sky looked dull and the wind carried the smell of dust through the narrow streets of the town. She was sitting near the small window of her family's house, gently pressing old piano keys that had lost their shine years ago. The instrument had scratches along its sides and one key stuck if pressed too hard, but to her it was priceless. It had been given to her by a retired music teacher who once heard her playing in a community hall and saw something special. Her life was simple. She worked during the day at a local clothing shop, folding fabric, greeting customers, and standing for long hours. The pay was just enough to help her family cover bills and buy groceries. Music was never her job. It was her comfort. It was what she turned to when she felt tired, worried, or unseen. That afternoon, her phone buzzed with a message from the town's cultural committee. They were organizing a large event at the main auditorium. Performers from nearby cities would attend. Singers, musicians, and dancers were already listed on the poster. Her name was not among them at first, but someone had recommended her after hearing her play at a small gathering months ago. The message was short. It asked if she would be willing to perform a short piece at the event. Just 10 minutes. A small slot between two well-known acts. She read the message 3 times. Her heart beat faster with each word. The auditorium was not like the small halls she was used to. It was the biggest stage in town. Hundreds of people would attend. Important guests would sit in the front rows. Cameras would record everything. She placed her hand on the piano keys but did not press them. For a moment, doubt filled her mind. She had never studied at a famous music school. She did not own expensive instruments. She had learned by listening, by practicing late at night, by making mistakes and trying again. When she showed the message to her family, their reactions were mixed. Her mother smiled softly and said it was a good opportunity. Her father looked thoughtful. He worried about her being disappointed. He knew how people in town could talk. News travels fast in small places. By evening, neighbors had heard about it. Some congratulated her politely. Others raised their eyebrows. Are they sure they want her? One person whispered near the corner shop. She plays well, but that stage is different. Another replied. She might freeze in front of that many people. The words were not meant for her ears. But in a town like that, nothing stayed hidden for long. At work the next day, a coworker asked about the event with a half-smile. So you're performing with professionals now? The coworker said. That's brave. The word brave did not feel like a compliment. She nodded quietly and continued folding clothes. She had learned not to argue with opinions. Instead, she carried them home like heavy bags and let the piano absorb her feelings. That night, she played longer than usual. Her fingers moved across the keys with care. Each note felt like a conversation with herself. She did not choose loud or dramatic pieces. She played melodies that spoke gently but deeply. The invitation required her to confirm within 2 days. She did not answer immediately. She walked through the streets in the evening, thinking. The event poster was already placed near the market. She stood in front of it. Bright names filled most of the space. Singers with social media followers. Musicians trained in big cities. Her name would appear at the bottom in smaller letters. For a second, she imagined herself standing on that stage. The bright lights, the silence before playing, the possibility of making a mistake. She closed her eyes and remembered the first time she touched a piano. She had been very young. The sound amazed her, felt like speaking without using words. Through music, she could say things she could never explain in conversation. That memory gave her strength. The next morning, she sent a simple reply. Yes, I would be honored to perform. Once her name was officially added to the program, the whispers grew louder. Some people were curious. Others were certain she would not succeed. She's sweet, but this is too big for her, someone said at a tea stall. I heard the audience will include important sponsors, another added. If she messes up, it will be embarrassing. She tried not to listen, but words have a way of finding their target. The event organizers called her for a short rehearsal meeting at the auditorium. When she stepped inside the large hall for the first time, her breath caught. The ceiling was high. The The stage seemed far from the back seats. Rows and rows of chairs stretched out like waves. The grand piano placed at the center looked polished and perfect. Nothing like her old one at home. One of the organizers handed her the schedule. "You'll perform after the second singer," he said. "Just keep it short and simple. The audience will be waiting for the main act." Short and simple. She nodded. She understood her place in the program. She was not the highlight. During rehearsal, a few other performers were present. They chatted confidently, discussing past shows and future plans. She stayed quiet, studying the keys of the grand piano. When she finally pressed them, the sound filled the hall in a way she had never experienced. It echoed beautifully. One performer glanced at her and whispered something to another. They both smiled. She pretended not to notice. On her way home, she felt the weight of expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Not expectations of success, but expectations of failure. It seemed many people were already preparing themselves for her mistake. That evening, her father sat beside her while she practiced. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," he said gently. "Just play the way you always do." His words were simple, but they stayed with her. As the days passed, the town grew more excited about the event. Tickets sold quickly. Posters appeared on social media. People talked about what they would wear and which performances they were most excited to see. Very few mentioned her name with confidence. But inside her small room, something different was happening. Instead of fear, a quiet determination began to grow. She practiced early in the morning before work. She practiced at night after dinner. Not to impress, not to compete, but to be ready. Sometimes she made mistakes and felt frustration rising. Sometimes she imagined the audience losing interest. But then she would close her eyes and remember why she loved music in the first place. It was never about applause. It was about feeling understood without speaking. One evening, as she finished a long practice session, her mother placed a cup of tea beside her. "No matter what happens," her mother said softly, "we are proud of you for trying." Those words meant more than any compliment. The night before the event, she could barely sleep. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. Doubt tried to return, reminding her of every whisper and every raised eyebrow. But beneath the doubt, there was something stronger. A belief that her music carried her truth. Outside, the town prepared for a night of entertainment. Inside her heart, she prepared for something deeper. They thought she would flop. They thought she would freeze. They thought she would prove them right. But as she finally drifted into a light sleep, one thought remained steady in her mind. She would walk onto that stage, and she would play the first note exactly the way she felt it. The morning after she accepted the invitation felt different. The town looked the same, the streets still narrow, the air still carrying the usual mix of dust and cooking spices, but inside her something had shifted. The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. At the clothing shop, customers came and went as usual. She folded shirts, arranged bright fabrics on shelves, and greeted people with a calm smile. But in her mind, music played constantly. Every small break became a quiet rehearsal. She would tap her fingers lightly against the counter, imagining the smooth keys of the grand piano at the auditorium. Some coworkers had heard more details about the event. One of them leaned close and said, "I saw the poster online. Big names are coming. That's serious." The tone carried surprise more than encouragement. Another added, "Just don't be nervous. Big stages can make people forget everything." She smiled politely. She knew they did not mean harm. Still, every comment reminded her that many people expected her to fail. It was as if the town had already decided how her story would end. In the evenings, her house became her small world of focus. The old piano stood near the window, its wood faded but strong. She cleaned it carefully before every practice session, as if preparing it for something important too. She began waking up earlier than usual. Before sunrise, while most of the town still slept, she would sit at the piano and play softly so she would not disturb the neighbors. The quiet of early morning felt safe. No whispers, no opinions, just her and the music. She did not choose a flashy piece. She chose something meaningful, a melody that started gently, almost fragile, then slowly grew stronger. It reflected her own journey. She practiced the difficult parts again and again until her fingers could move without hesitation. One afternoon, she returned to the auditorium for an official sound check. The large doors felt heavier this time. A few performers were already there. They spoke confidently about their past concerts and upcoming opportunities in other cities. She listened quietly from a distance. When her turn came to test the piano, she sat down carefully. The stage lights were not fully on, but even the soft lighting made her aware of how exposed she would be during the real event. The empty seats in front of her felt like silent judges. She pressed a few keys. The sound traveled across the hall with clarity. Felt powerful, almost intimidating. This instrument responded differently from her old piano at home. It was smoother, more sensitive. Every small mistake would be heard clearly. An organizer approached her. "Remember," he said kindly but firmly, "keep it within your time. The program is tight." She nodded. She understood. Her performance was not meant to take center stage. It was simply a small part of a larger show. As she packed her sheet music, she overheard two people speaking near the stage steps. "She's the local girl, right?" one asked. "Yes, I think so." Brave of her to try. Brave again. The word followed her everywhere. That evening, while walking home, she passed by a group of teenagers discussing the event. One of them noticed her and whispered something. They did not laugh loudly, but their expressions were enough. For a brief moment, doubt returned stronger than before. What if they were right? What if she walked onto that stage and her hands trembled? What if the first note came out wrong? She stopped walking and took a deep breath. She reminded herself of something important. She had played in front of people before. Small crowds, yes, but she had felt fear before and survived it. At home, her father noticed she seemed quieter than usual. "Too many thoughts?" he asked gently. She nodded. He sat across from her and said, "People talk because it is easy. Playing in front of them is not easy. That alone makes you stronger than most." His words settled in her heart. Over the next few days, the town's excitement grew. Social media posts highlighted the main performers. Their pictures were shared widely. Comments praised their talent and experience. Her name appeared near the bottom of the list. Some comments asked, "Who is she?" Others guessed she must be a student or a beginner. She avoided reading too much. Instead, she focused on refining her piece. She paid attention to small details. The softness of the opening notes, the timing of the stronger section in the middle, the calm ending that lingered like a quiet goodbye. Sometimes her fingers slipped. When that happened, frustration rose quickly. She would close her eyes and start again, slower this time. She reminded herself that perfection was not the goal. Feeling was the goal. One evening, a neighbor visited her mother and brought up the performance. "It's good she has confidence," the neighbor said, "but events like this can be overwhelming. I hope she doesn't get embarrassed." The words were not cruel, but they carried doubt. She heard them from the next room. For a second, her chest felt tight. Embarrassed. The idea hurt more than she expected. Later that night, she sat alone at the piano in darkness, with only a small lamp lighting the keys. She began to play, not for practice, but to release the weight she felt. The melody flowed naturally. In that quiet moment, she realized something clear. No one else could feel what she felt when she played. They could judge her clothes, her background, her lack of formal training. But they could not judge the connection she had with the music unless they truly listened. The thought gave her calm strength. 2 days before the event, the organizers shared the final program schedule publicly. Her performance would take place earlier in the evening, just before a popular singer. Some people commented online that they might arrive later to catch the real show. She read that comment once and then put her phone away. Instead of feeling small, she began to feel something unexpected. A quiet determination that surprised even her. If people planned to arrive late, she would make those who came early remember her. If some people were distracted, she would play in a way that demanded attention without asking for it. Her mother helped her choose what to wear. Nothing fancy, just something clean, simple, and comfortable. She did not want to pretend to be someone else on stage. The night before the event, she practiced one final time. She did not play the entire piece over and over. She played it once, fully, with feeling. When she reached the final note, she let her hands rest on the keys. Her father, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, said, "That is enough." She nodded. She knew he was right. Later, as she lay in bed, the town buzzed with excitement outside. Cars passed by more frequently. People discussed outfits and seating arrangements. The auditorium lights were being tested one last time. Inside her small room, everything was still. She thought about the whispers. They thought she would flop. They thought she was not ready. They thought she would prove their doubts correct. But she realized something important. Their expectations did not define her ability. Her worth was not measured by their guesses. As sleep slowly came, her mind replayed the first note of her piece. Clear, strong, honest. No matter what happened after that, she promised herself one thing. When her fingers touched the keys on that stage, she would not play to silence critics. She would play to tell her story. The day of the event arrived faster than she expected. The morning light felt sharper, almost brighter than usual. She woke up before her alarm and lay still for a few moments, listening to the quiet sounds of her home. For a second, she forgot what day it was. Then it returned to her all at once. Tonight, she sat up slowly, letting the feeling settle instead of fighting it. Her heart was not racing the way she feared it would. Instead, there was a deep, steady beat in her chest, like a reminder that she was alive and ready. The town already felt different. Cars moved more often on the streets. Banners near the market entrance welcomed guests to the cultural night. People talked about reserved seats and special performances. There was an energy in the air that made everything feel important. She spent the morning quietly helping her mother in the kitchen. Simple tasks helped calm her thoughts. Washing dishes, cutting vegetables, sweeping the floor. Ordinary actions reminded her that she was still the same person she had been yesterday. Her father left early to help arrange chairs at the auditorium. He wanted to be useful, to stay busy instead of worrying. Before leaving, he looked at her and said, "Today, just breathe. Nothing more." She nodded. In the afternoon, she took out the clothes she had chosen. They were simple and neat, nothing flashy. She ironed them carefully, smoothing every wrinkle as if preparing for something sacred. When she finished getting ready, she stood in front of the mirror for a long moment. She did not see a performer. She saw a daughter, a worker, a girl who had spent years playing on an old piano near a dusty window. But behind her eyes, there was something new, a quiet strength that had grown over the past weeks. As evening approached, her family walked with her to the auditorium. The building glowed under bright lights. People gathered outside, dressed in their best clothes. Laughter mixed with music playing from speakers near the entrance. When she stepped inside, the sound of many voices filled the large hall. Volunteers guided guests to their seats. Performers moved in and out of dressing rooms. The air smelled of perfume and stage dust. She checked in with one of the organizers. He gave her a quick smile and said, "You're on schedule. Be ready." The words were simple, but they made everything feel real. Backstage, the atmosphere was different from the bright excitement in the audience area. It was tense and focused. Performers warmed up their voices. Musicians adjusted instruments. Some stood alone in corners with closed eyes, whispering quiet prayers or repeating lyrics under their breath. She found a small chair near the wall and sat down. She placed her hands in her lap and pressed her fingers together gently. They felt warm, steady. From behind the curtain, she could hear the opening speech begin. The host welcomed everyone and thanked sponsors. Applause rose and fell like waves. Each clap echoed through the walls and into her chest. The first performance began. A singer with a powerful voice filled the hall with confident notes. The audience responded with loud cheers. She listened carefully, not comparing, just observing. Each act seemed polished, practiced, and comfortable on stage. Her turn was getting closer. A volunteer approached her and said quietly, "You're next after this act." The words made her stomach tighten slightly, not from fear, but from awareness. This was the moment she had agreed to, the moment everyone had formed opinions about. She stood and walked closer to the side of the stage. From there, she could see part of the audience through a small opening in the curtain. The hall was full, rows and rows of faces. Some leaned forward with excitement. Others looked relaxed, waiting for the highlight of the evening. She spotted her parents sitting a few rows from the front. Her mother's hands were folded tightly in her lap. Her father sat upright, his expression serious but proud. The current performer finished to loud applause. The host returned to the stage, smiling brightly. "And now," the host announced, "we have a local talent who will share a special piano performance with us tonight." The introduction was short. No long list of achievements. No dramatic build-up. Just her name. The applause that followed was polite but softer than before. It was not unkind. It was simply unsure. She took a slow breath and stepped forward as the curtain opened. The stage lights felt warm against her face. For a second, the brightness made it hard to see clearly. The grand piano stood at the center, shining under the lights. It looked both beautiful and intimidating. She walked toward it carefully, aware of every step. The sound of her shoes against the stage floor seemed louder than expected. She could feel hundreds of eyes following her movement. In the audience, a few people whispered to each other. Some adjusted in their seats. A few glanced at their phones, perhaps checking messages while waiting for the next major act. She reached the piano bench and paused. The silence in the hall was different now. It was not the loud energy of applause. It was a waiting silence, a testing silence. She sat down slowly and adjusted the bench. The smooth surface of the keys reflected the stage lights. For a brief second, her reflection stared back at her from the polished piano. She placed her hands gently on her lap. Her mind could have filled with the whispers she had heard over the past weeks. They thought she would flop. They thought she was not ready. They thought she would freeze. But instead of letting those thoughts grow, she remembered the early mornings, the quiet practice sessions, the way music had comforted her when no one else understood her feelings. She looked out at the audience one more time. The front rows held serious faces, important guests, sponsors, people whose opinions seemed heavy. Then she looked slightly farther back. She saw familiar neighbors, a shopkeeper she greeted every morning, a teacher who once encouraged her, faces that had known her long before this stage. She realized something simple. They were all just people, not judges, not enemies, just people waiting to hear something. Her fingers moved from her lap to hover above the keys. The piano felt cool under her touch. The first note of her piece waited patiently, like a door that needed to be opened. The hall was completely silent now. Even the smallest sound seemed clear, the soft hum of the lights, a distant cough, the faint rustle of clothing. For a split second, time felt slower. She closed her eyes, not to escape the audience, but to center herself. She took one steady breath in, then out. This was not about proving anyone wrong. This was not about becoming the highlight of the night. This was about sharing something honest. Her fingers lowered slightly, almost touching the keys. In that quiet moment, before a single sound filled the hall, every doubt, every whisper, every raised eyebrow faded into the background. There was only her, and the first note waiting to be played. Her fingers finally touched the keys. The first note rose into the air, clear and steady. It was not loud. It was not dramatic, but it was confident. The sound traveled gently through the hall, reaching the back rows without force. It did not beg for attention. It simply existed, pure and honest. A few people who had been shifting in their seats became still. She pressed the second note, then the third. The opening melody moved like a quiet conversation. Soft, careful, almost fragile. It felt like the beginning of a story told in a whisper. In the front row, One of the guests who had been glancing at his phone slowly lowered it. A woman who had been adjusting her bag paused and looked toward the stage. The change was subtle at first, almost invisible. But something in the air had shifted. Her hands moved with calm control. The weeks of early morning practice showed in the steadiness of her touch. Each note connected smoothly to the next. There was no rush, no panic. She did not look at the audience. She did not search for reactions. She stayed focused on the music, letting it guide her. The melody began to grow slightly stronger. The gentle opening gave way to deeper tones. The piano responded beautifully, its sound rich and full. The hall carried every detail. In the middle rows, whispers faded completely. Even those who had arrived early just to secure good seats for later performances found themselves paying attention. Her mother leaned forward without realizing it. Her father's serious expression softened. The music continued to build, not in a way that felt forced, but naturally, like a sunrise that slowly brightens the sky. The simple theme from the beginning returned, but this time with more strength behind it. She remembered every doubt she had heard over the past weeks, every raised eyebrow, every quiet comment. Instead of letting those memories hurt her, she let them shape the emotion in her playing. The next section of the piece carried a quiet determination. The notes became firmer, more confident. Her fingers moved across the keys with purpose. She was no longer just playing a melody. She was telling her story. In the back of the hall, a group of teenagers who had been whispering earlier now sat in silence. One of them leaned closer to the stage, eyes focused. The organizers standing near the curtain exchanged surprised glances. This was not the hesitant performance they had expected. The music swelled into its strongest moment. The sound filled the auditorium completely. It was powerful but not harsh. Emotional but not dramatic in a showy way. Carried weight. It carried truth. She could feel the vibration of the piano beneath her fingertips. The instrument no longer felt intimidating. It felt like a partner, responding to every feeling she poured into it. A man in the audience closed his eyes briefly, as if trying to hold onto the sound. A woman near the aisle wiped at the corner of her eye without drawing attention to herself. The piece began to shift again, slowly calming after its strongest point. The melody softened, returning to the gentleness of the beginning. But now it was different. It had traveled somewhere. It had grown. The hall remained completely silent except for the piano. No one checked their phone. No one whispered. Every face was turned toward the stage. She allowed herself one quick glance at the audience. What she saw surprised her. There was no doubt in their expressions now. There was focus. There was feeling. Her heart felt light. The final section approached. She slowed slightly, letting each note breathe. The ending was not loud. It did not try to impress. It simply settled. Her fingers pressed the last few notes with care. Each one faded gently into the air, leaving a soft echo behind. Then came the final note. She held it just long enough for it to linger, and then she lifted her hands. For a single second, the hall remained silent. It was not the uncertain silence from before. It was the kind of silence that follows something meaningful. Then the applause began. At first it came from a few places. Then it spread quickly, growing louder and stronger. Within moments, the entire auditorium was filled with clapping. People rose from their seats. The sound of applause echoed against the walls, almost as powerful as the music had been. Her mother stood with tears in her eyes. Her father clapped firmly, pride clear on his face. The same audience that had waited politely for her to finish was now cheering with genuine emotion. She sat still for a brief moment, almost unsure if the reaction was real. The applause continued, strong and steady. She stood slowly from the bench and gave a small, respectful bow. The lights felt warmer now, but no longer overwhelming. As she walked off the stage, the applause followed her. Behind the curtain, one of the organizers looked at her with wide eyes. That was... He paused, searching for the right word. That was beautiful. She smiled softly, still catching her breath. Other performers who had seemed distant earlier now looked at her differently. There was no whispering, no raised eyebrows, only quiet respect. From the stage, the host returned to the microphone, clearly impressed. The energy in the hall had changed completely. The audience, once waiting for the main act, now carried the emotion of her performance with them. Backstage, she sat down again on the same small chair where she had waited before. But she felt like a different person. Not because of the applause, not because people had stood, but because she had done what she came to do. She had played honestly. She had not frozen. She had not flopped. She had given the audience something real. As the next performer prepared to go on stage, one of the volunteers leaned toward her and said quietly, "You surprised everyone." She thought about that sentence for a moment. Maybe she had. But more than that, she had surprised herself. When she first received the invitation, fear had been louder than confidence. Doubt had been heavy. The whispers had felt endless. Now, sitting backstage with the sound of applause still echoing in her ears, she understood something clearly. The first note had changed everything. It had not just filled the hall with music. It had broken the expectation that she would fail. Out in the audience, people were still talking about her performance in low, amazed voices. Some asked each other where she had trained. Others wondered why they had never heard of her before. Her parents remained standing for a moment longer than everyone else, as if holding on to the pride they felt. On stage, the event continued. Lights flashed. Another act began. But something in the atmosphere remained different. The audience had learned a quiet lesson. Talent does not always come with a loud introduction. Sometimes it walks onto the stage quietly, and with one honest note, it changes the entire room. The applause did not fade quickly. Even after she stepped fully behind the curtain, she could still hear it rolling through the hall like distant thunder. Felt unreal. Only minutes earlier, she had walked onto that same stage under quiet, unsure claps. Now the sound carried warmth and respect. She remained seated backstage, trying to steady her breathing. Her hands were slightly warm from playing, but they were no longer trembling. A volunteer handed her a small bottle of water. She thanked them softly. From the side of the curtain, she watched the next performer begin. The audience was still energized, still whispering about what they had just heard. It was not loud enough to disturb the show, but it was there. A shift, a change in tone. One of the performers who had seemed distant earlier walked over to her. There was no trace of the earlier half-smiles or quiet judgment. "I didn't expect that," the performer admitted honestly. "That was really powerful." She nodded politely, unsure what to say. Compliments felt unfamiliar in this setting. She had always played in small spaces where praise came gently, not in waves. As the event continued, she stayed backstage, not wanting to disturb the flow. But people kept approaching her quietly. A sound technician told her the hall had never felt that still before. Another organizer said the sponsors in the front row were asking about her. Each comment felt like a small surprise. When the main act finally finished, the crowd stood again. The program ended with a final speech and thanks to all performers. This time, when her name was mentioned among the participants, the applause was strong and confident. There was no hesitation. After the lights brightened and people began to leave their seats, she stepped out from backstage into the main hall. The atmosphere felt different now that the formal show was over. People were smiling, talking, taking pictures. As she walked carefully through the aisle, someone called her name. It was an older woman from the neighborhood. The same woman who had once questioned whether such a big stage was right for her. "You made us proud tonight," the woman said sincerely. "I had no idea you played like that." There was no sarcasm, only honesty. A group of teenagers approached next. They looked slightly embarrassed. "That was amazing," one of them said. "We didn't know you were that good." She smiled gently. "Thank you for listening," she replied. Her parents reached her through the crowd. Her mother hugged her tightly without saying a word. Her father placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You played from your heart," he said. "That is why it worked." Those simple words meant more than the applause. As they moved toward the exit, more people stopped her. Some asked where she had learned. Others asked if she gave lessons. A local teacher suggested she should consider performing at future events. Someone even mentioned recording a video of her performance. She answered politely, still trying to process everything. Outside the auditorium, the night air felt cool against her face. The sky above was clear, dotted with stars. The same sky she had looked at many nights while practicing near her window. But tonight felt different. People gathered near the entrance, still discussing the performances. She overheard fragments of conversations. "I thought she would be nervous. That first note changed everything. She deserved more time on stage." Each sentence felt like a quiet correction of the doubts that had surrounded her. As she walked home with her family, the streets were still lively. Some cars passed slowly, music playing from open windows. A few neighbors waved at her from across the road. Back in her small house, the familiar walls greeted her. The old piano stood by the window, exactly as she had left it. She walked over and ran her fingers lightly over its surface. This was where it had all started. Not under bright lights, not in front of hundreds of people. Right here. Her mother prepared tea while her father spoke about the audience's reaction. They replayed small moments from the night, the standing applause, the silence before the clapping began. She listened quietly, letting their words settle. Later, when the house grew quiet and her parents went to rest, she remained alone in the room. She sat at the old piano but did not play. Instead, she thought about the weeks leading up to this night. The whispers, the doubtful looks, the comments online. She realized something important. Those doubts had almost convinced her to say no. If she had listened only to fear, she would have missed this moment. She would have stayed small to match other people's expectations. But she had said yes. And that simple yes had changed everything. Her phone buzzed with messages. Friends she had not spoken to in months were congratulating her. A short video clip of her performance was already being shared online. Comments praised her emotion and control. She read a few, then put the phone aside. The attention felt nice, but it was not the most important part. What mattered was the shift she felt inside. For years, she had played quietly, almost apologetically, as if asking permission to take up space. Tonight, she had played without apology. She had taken her place on that stage fully. And the audience had responded. The next morning, the town felt different again. People greeted her with wider smiles. At the clothing shop, customers mentioned her performance before discussing fabrics. "You surprised everyone," one customer said warmly. Her coworker who had once warned her about big stages now looked at her with clear respect. "You handled it better than most would," the coworker admitted. She did not boast. She did not remind anyone of their earlier doubts. She simply thanked them and continued her work. But inside, something had shifted permanently. She no longer carried the heavy weight of needing to prove herself. She had already done it, not by arguing, not by defending herself, but by playing one honest note. Later that day, one of the event organizers called her. They thanked her again and asked if she would consider performing at future programs. They even mentioned the possibility of a longer slot next time. She listened carefully, grateful but calm. After the call ended, she looked around her small room once more. The walls had not changed. The furniture was the same. Her life was still simple, but her confidence was no longer fragile. The town that once expected her to flop now spoke of her with admiration. And as she sat by the window that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft colors, she understood something clearly. The applause had faded. The lights had dimmed. But the belief she found in herself would remain. They had thought she would fail. Instead, she had reminded them, and herself, that quiet strength can be the loudest sound in the room. In the days that followed the event, life did not suddenly turn into something dramatic or unrealistic. She still woke up early. She still walked to work. She still helped her family in the evenings. But beneath the routine, something steady and powerful had changed. People in town now looked at her differently, not in a way that felt distant or strange, but in a way that carried respect. The same neighbors who once questioned whether she was ready for a big stage now greeted her with warm smiles. At the clothing shop, customers often brought up the performance before speaking about anything else. "I still remember that first note," one woman said while choosing fabric. "It gave me chills." Another customer said, "You played like someone who has lived 100 stories." She would smile gently and thank them. She did not exaggerate the moment. She did not speak proudly about proving anyone wrong. She simply accepted their words with quiet gratitude. What mattered most to her was not the praise. It was the feeling she carried inside. For years, she had kept her love for music close to her heart. She had played softly, almost carefully, as if worried that someone might say she did not belong. Now she understood something important. She had always belonged. The stage had not created her talent. It had only revealed it. A week after the event, the cultural committee invited her for a small meeting. She felt a familiar nervousness walking into the same auditorium, but this time it was lighter. The organizer who had once reminded her to keep her performance short now greeted her with enthusiasm. "We've received many positive comments about your piece," he said. "People are asking when they can hear you again." He suggested she consider performing at a larger regional event in the coming months. It would involve more preparation and possibly traveling to a nearby city. The idea felt exciting but also serious. She thanked him and said she would think about it. On her way home, she walked slowly, letting the news settle in her mind. The streets looked the same as they always had. Children played near the corner. Shopkeepers called out to customers. Life continued in its simple rhythm. She realized that success did not have to mean leaving everything behind. It could mean growing while staying rooted. That evening, she sat by her old piano again. The instrument still had its scratches. One key still stuck if pressed too hard. But she no longer saw its flaws. She saw the place where her courage had been built quietly over years. She began to play not the same piece from the event but something new. The notes came naturally, freely. There was no fear in her touch anymore. Her mother paused in the kitchen to listen. Her father leaned against the doorway, smiling softly. The music filled the small house the same way it had filled the auditorium. The difference was not in the size of the room. The difference was in her confidence. A few days later, she visited the retired music teacher who had given her the piano years ago. The teacher had heard about the performance from neighbors. "I knew you had something special," the teacher said warmly. "But what matters most is that you believed it too." She realized that belief had been the missing piece for a long time. Not skill, not opportunity, belief. As weeks passed, small opportunities continued to appear. A school invited her to perform for students. A local event asked her to play during a charity evening. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt forced. She chose carefully, making sure she never lost the simple reason she had started playing in the first place. One afternoon, she overheard two young girls talking outside her house. "That's the girl who played at the big event," one whispered. "I want to learn piano too," the other replied. She stood by the window and listened, her heart warm. If her performance had done nothing else, it had shown others that quiet dreams could step into the light. The town still had people who doubted things easily. That would never change completely. But now, whenever someone mentioned her name with surprise, others would quickly respond with respect. "She's talented. She earned that applause. She proved everyone wrong." She did not focus on the last sentence. Proving people wrong was never her goal. Her goal had simply been to play honestly. One evening, as she walked past the auditorium again, she paused outside. The building stood calm and quiet, nothing like the bright, crowded night of her performance. She stood there for a moment, remembering the silence before her first note, the waiting, the doubt, the choice to begin. She understood now that life would offer many stages, some large, some small, some filled with supportive faces, others filled with quiet skepticism. But the lesson would remain the same. Walk forward, sit down, play the first note, no matter how many people think you will fail. When she returned home that night, she felt peaceful. Not because she had gained attention, but because she had gained clarity. She knew who she was, a girl from a small town, a worker who folded clothes during the day, a daughter who helped in the kitchen, and a musician who could hold a room in complete silence with one honest note. The whispers that once followed her had faded. In their place stood something stronger, respect, and more importantly, self-respect. Months later, when she stood on another stage in a nearby city, she no longer felt the same fear she had felt before that first big performance. She still felt nerves because nerves meant she cared, but they did not control her. She would always remember that first night, the quiet introduction, the doubtful applause, the steady breath before touching the keys, and the way everything changed after that first sound filled the air. They had thought she would flop. They had expected her to struggle. But what they did not understand was that she had already faced harder stages in her life. Stages without lights, without applause, without recognition. The real performance had happened in the quiet years when no one was watching. The night at the auditorium was simply the moment the world finally listened. And from that point on, whenever doubt appeared again, she carried a simple memory with her. The sound of one clear note rising into silence. A reminder that sometimes all it takes to change a room and a life is the courage to begin.